This leadership debate, what impact is it having on the working of the House?
I mean, it's complete chaos. Just yesterday, we have an ambulance crisis that's hitting people across the country and causing health workers and patients untold anxiety and pain. And yet the new Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, just seemingly couldn't be bothered to turn up for an urgent question which Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, had put on that crisis. So he couldn't be bothered to turn up. Yesterday, we also had the Home Secretary, and, we're in the midst of a passport crisis and any number of other things going wrong in her office, and she didn't bother to turn up to be scrutinised by the Home Affairs Select Committee. Neither of those two people are leadership contestants, and yet where were they? Absent. It's an absolute chaotic government at the moment, and really Britain does deserve better.
Well, I put that to Therese Coffey, whether it was a zombie government, and she said quite often you wouldn't necessarily have the Health Secretary there, it would be the Health Minister. I wasn't aware of the situation with Priti Patel, or I'd have put that to her as well. And she also pointed out that there had been a Cobra meeting, so, they are taking it seriously.
So where was he? We need to hear what was said in that Cobra meeting, and that should have been the job of the Health Secretary. And I'm sorry, just saying, well, sometimes junior ministers do come on. Yes, that's true. But this is a serious national crisis. And this is a Tory government that's completely chaotic. They're all over the place. We've got leadership contestants making unfunded tax cuts promises all over the place without really thinking about what that's going to mean in terms of public services. And meanwhile, we've got government ministers who just can't be bothered to turn up to Parliament.
Vote of no confidence in themselves on Monday. That's rather taking the sting out of what you were trying to do.
It's extraordinary. It is unprecedented for any government of any colour to refuse to take a vote of no confidence tabled by Her Majesty's official opposition. We did one that was very, very similar to the one the Tories put themselves on the 2nd of August 1965, where Ted Heath criticised the then Labour leader's style of government and the way he was handling the, actually, cost of living crisis, funnily enough. And where are we now? A Tory government who only last week ministers were resigning from every 20 minutes, saying they had no confidence in the Prime Minister themselves, but they're too scared or too chaotic, I don't know what it is, to take our motion. Instead of which, we've got this very odd thing where the government has tabled a motion of confidence in itself. Obviously, that's something we will be voting against. We don't have confidence in them. But I also ask every Tory MP who last week said they didn't have confidence in Boris Johnson to remember that Boris Johnson is still in charge of the government. He's got a whole summer of chaos that he could cause. And if they really meant what they said last week, every single Tory MP needs to think long and hard before they vote to say they have confidence in a government which continues to be led by Boris Johnson.
Well, you're talking about wasting parliamentary time. What's the point of having this sort of vote, which you originally wanted, when you know that you don't have the numbers?
Well, we want it because enough Tory MPs have said they don't have confidence in this Prime Minister. But let's just take a couple of examples of his pattern of behaviour. We know, because he said so, he confirmed it to the liaison committee, a parliamentary committee, last week, just sort of hours before he said that he will step down at some point, that this is someone who just recklessly, when Foreign Secretary, went and stayed the night at the home of a former KGB agent without his security detail, without his officials present. Who knows what was said or done at that meeting? So that's one example of how lightly this man treats foreign security and national security.
For those who don't know.
Yes, Alexander Lebedev, who mysteriously then pops up in the House of Lords a little while later. Now, that's a man who's not taking...
It's his son.
Yes, his son, sorry. It's not a man who's taking national security seriously. So that's a serious risk. OK, so that's one thing he does. The other thing is we know that he is guilty of not telling the truth because the police have found him guilty of partying in 10 Downing Street while everyone else was locked down in the very first lockdown in 2020. That's really not on. So we've got someone who the government themselves said they had no faith in, like just last week. MPs themselves, 141 or so of them, voted against him in their vote of no confidence recently. And yet there he very is, over the course of the summer, when there will be no Parliament to hold him even to any account whatsoever.
Yeah, but you're telling my viewers everything that they know already, so what's the point of having a vote of no confidence? We already know, and it's one that you're going to...
Because he's still there.
Would have lost.
Because he's still there. Because he's still there, and he shouldn't still be there. And the Tories have got the chance to do the honourable thing on Monday, and I urge them all, because otherwise they are all culpable.
For Christmas, they're not
all... culpable.
They're voting to lose their own jobs, potentially.
They are voting to say what they already said, that they have no confidence in this government led by Boris Johnson. They could do that. Now, there are other people who could run the country as a caretaker Prime Minister. I mean, the Tory party has a Deputy Prime Minister who isn't in the running for the leadership. There's other people who are no longer in the leadership contest who've got experience. I would rather we had a Labour government with a Labour Prime Minister, obviously. Now, what will happen on Monday is that Tory MPs, if they vote to keep this Prime Minister in post over the summer, they are voting against their own consciences, many of them. They're voting against the national interest. They are voting against having someone who just might, take seriously national security and being honest and truthful with the British people. I mean, really, the British people do deserve better.
Well, the British people who are struggling most are getting 37 billion quid from this government starting today.
They are the same British people who, over the last 2 years, have had to suffer 15 Tory tax rises. So working people aren't fooled by this. Take away with one hand and then give back a bit with the other hand. They're not fooled. They know, for instance, that it's just not fair that the super rich can benefit from things like non-dom tax status, which is where people can sort of claim residence in different countries and therefore avoid paying their fair share of tax. They know that it's not fair that small businesses are having to pay rates that are just business rates, that are just not comparable with the way that big tech companies and online companies can get away with paying much less than their fair share. They know that's not fair, and they know that we need a fair tax system. That's why, in my view, we need a Labour government with Keir Starmer in number 10, and the contrast with this current government and this current bunch of ministers and Tory leadership contestants spraying out unfunded tax cut promises, is quite extraordinary contrast. British people deserve better.
My viewers are not daft. They know what non-dom status means,
Yes.
and they know that the Conservative Party represent that, and they still voted for them.
Well, that was 2.5 years ago, and they've had to
Rules
suffer.
are more or less the same.
And during the last 2 years, there have been 15 Tory tax rises
We've had
on
a
working
pandemic.
people. On working people, most of those tax
pay for
rises
it
have actually
somehow.
had most of those tax rises. Yeah, but they're hitting working people, and that's the difference, isn't it, Kay? You know, you can make a decision in politics. Are you going to hit working people the hardest, or are you going to actually close some of those tax loopholes that benefit the super rich? Are you going to do things that you actually promised to do? This government said it was going to cut VAT on fuel bills, which it said was one of the Brexit benefits. Where's that promise gone? That would benefit working people right now. And do you know what? Your viewers, as you said, they're smart people. They will also be adding up. Can they afford to pay their fuel bills at the end of this month? How are they going to get to the end of the year? That's something any of the Tory leadership contenders could promise right now, instead of which they're promising unfunded tax cuts. And your viewers also know that that's not on, because it's their money that's paying for those tax cuts, with no thought from those leadership contenders of what that actually means for public services that we all rely on.
Yeah, but we also need to increase our defence spending, don't we, because of what's happening in Europe, and so that costs money as well.
Yes.
Where is this magic money tree?
Well, it's called growing the economy, which under the last 12 years of Tory government, unfortunately, we've got stagnant growth. And if you want to bring in money for public services, you need to have economic growth, which is why Keir Starmer has said it will be a top priority for a Labour government. But it also needs a fair tax system, so that when you bring in money for public services, you're not landing all of the cost on working people. And I've said, you know, that the non-dom tax status is not fair, and it isn't placing responsibility where it needs to be, and we need a fair tax system. At the moment, what we've got is someone
you would increase taxes for higher earners?
Well, I've just said we would abolish the non-dom tax status, yes, but we would also abolish the VAT exemption for private schools, which would bring in £1.7 billion that we could be spending on children's recovery in state schools. And I think, again, most people would agree that's a fair tax system,
What about
and that's
income
what we
tax?
need. Well, I mean, at the moment, we don't yet know the full extent of the chaos that will be left to us when we come into government, so you wouldn't expect me.
As Labour, why do you always back off when we talk about income tax specifics? You're very specific about other taxes, but you realise that income tax increases is not what people will vote for, so you're always very cautious.
Well, at the moment, we have to be. It would be irresponsible of me to say to your viewers something that they know we can't fulfil. So I can't do that without making sure that we make a promise that we can keep. And that's why I think it's important that we show people that when we make a promise, we know how we're going to afford it, we know where the money's coming from. And as we don't know, unfortunately, what chaos this government will cause over the next however long it's going to be. I mean, whether it's going to be October or it's going to be next May, or the general election we have to wait for another 2 years.
I would bet on that one.
Would you?
Yes,
2 years?
I would, yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why it'd be irresponsible of me to make a commitment right now about income tax when we just don't know what's going to be going on.
Who are you most afraid of
I'm not
coming to-
afraid of any of them as competition for the Labour Party. I think we are capable, we are a government in waiting. I am afraid of the damage they're going to do to the country over the next 2 years.
OK, I'm not going to let you have coffee before you come on in future. There's no stopping you this morning, is there? I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of you this morning. It's good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.